My parents gave my brother my inheritance until the bank revealed who owned the trust. The first time my mother told me that my inheritance belonged to my brother, she said it across a polished conference table at Hillside Community Bank. She did not raise her voice. She did not look embarrassed. She folded her hands over her purse and spoke with the patient tone she usually reserved for explaining family decisions she had already made. "Ryan has children and a business to protect," she said. "You have a salary, retirement benefits, and no one depending on you." We made the responsible choice. My father sat beside her, staring at the yellow legal pad in front of him. My brother occupied the chair nearest the door. He had brought a leather portfolio with his company logo embossed on the front, as though this were a business meeting instead of a family betrayal. On the table between us was a transfer request for $238,000. The money was supposed to move from the Mercer Family Preservation Trust into Ryan's construction company before the close of business that Friday. My parents had signed the request as trustees. Ryan had already promised part of it to a lender, who was threatening to seize 2 of his work trucks. They believed the transfer was practically finished. Then the bank's trust officer, Thomas Green, opened a faded blue folder and asked my mother a question. "Mrs. Mercer, what document gives you current authority over this trust?" My mother pointed to the signature page. "Our names are right there." "They were," he said, "until your daughter turned 45. The room went completely still. Thomas turned the trust agreement toward me and placed his finger beneath a paragraph I had never seen. "According to the governing instrument, Ellen became the sole acting trustee 7 years ago. She is also the sole current beneficiary of this account. You and your husband do not own these funds, and you cannot give them to anyone. Would you confront your family immediately, or let the bank finish tracing every dollar first?" I wish I could say I understood everything the moment Thomas spoke. I did not. For most of my adult life, I had believed the money belonged to my parents until they died. I thought my grandmother had left them a family trust and named me as one of the people who might eventually inherit whatever remained. That belief had not come from an attorney or a bank statement. It had come from my parents. My grandmother, Ruth Mercer, had been my father's mother. She owned a small commercial building outside Columbus, Ohio, with a laundromat on the first floor and 4 apartments above it. She was not wealthy in the way people imagine when they hear the word trust. She drove the same Buick for 15 years, wrapped leftover cake in bread bags, and wrote every expense in a spiral notebook she kept beside the telephone. But she had bought that building with my grandfather in 1968, paid it off, maintained it carefully, and refused every offer to sell until she was 79. By the time she finally sold it, the property had become valuable. My grandmother also understood our family better than anyone admitted. Ryan was 5 years younger than I was, and had always possessed the kind of confidence that made other people want to rescue him. When he was 16, he backed my father's truck into a mailbox, and somehow I ended up helping him pay for the repair because I had a summer job. When he dropped out of community college, my mother said he needed time to find the right path. When I changed majors after 1 semester, she reminded me that tuition was expensive and expected me to reimburse my parents for the difference. Ryan was not lazy. That would have made things simpler. He worked hard in bursts. He could renovate a kitchen beautifully, talk a furious customer into giving him another week, and convince a supplier to extend credit long after anyone else would have been cut off. He started Mercer Home Renewal in his early 30s and built it into a respectable remodeling business with 12 employees. From the outside, he looked successful. His trucks were clean. His crew wore matching shirts. He sponsored a Little League team and posted photographs of donated labor at veterans' homes. At Thanksgiving, he always arrived carrying expensive wine and talking about new contracts. What no one saw were the late tax payments, the revolving credit balances, and the money he borrowed from my parents whenever a project went over budget. I was the opposite. I had worked in payroll administration for a regional hospital system for 24 years. My job was not glamorous. I spent my days correcting time card errors, explaining deductions, balancing reports, and making sure thousands of employees were paid accurately. I rented a modest townhouse before buying a 2-bedroom condo at 41. I drove cars until repairing them cost more than replacing them. I had been engaged once in my 30s, but the relationship ended before the wedding. After that, I built a life that was quieter than the one I had imagined, but not empty. My parents described that life as easy. "You only have yourself to worry about," my mother often said. She never seemed to understand that being alone did not mean being free from fear, bills, illness, or the need for a secure future. It only meant there was no second income when something went wrong. My weakness was not that I failed to notice unfairness. I noticed it constantly. My weakness was that I treated every unfair thing as a price I could afford to pay for peace. When Ryan needed $4,000 after a customer withheld payment, I lent it to him. When my father needed help organizing medical bills after knee surgery, I spent 3 Saturdays at their house. When my mother forgot to order food for my birthday dinner because Ryan's family had surprised her with a visit, I said it did not matter. I believed that refusing to fight made me mature. What it actually made me was convenient. My grandmother saw some of this. She rarely criticized my parents directly, but she noticed which grandchild carried grocery bags without being asked, and which one arrived when there was something to receive. A year before she died, she called me on a Sunday afternoon and asked me to drive her to a lawyer's office. I remember the microwave clock in her kitchen reading 2:17. A grocery receipt was held against the refrigerator by a magnet shaped like a strawberry. She had circled a charge for coffee because the store had overcharged her by 80 cents. "What is this about?" I asked. "Paperwork," she said. "And I don't want your father making a production out of it." At the attorney's office, I waited in the lobby while she met privately with a woman named Patricia Nolan. When my grandmother came out, she looked tired but relieved. She handed me a sealed envelope. "Put this somewhere safe." I asked what it contained. "Something that will matter later." I placed it in a plastic storage bin with old tax returns, my college transcripts, and photographs from my engagement. During a move 3 years later, water leaked into the storage area. Several boxes were ruined. I assumed the envelope had been among them. That was my first major mistake. I never confirmed whether it had survived. When my grandmother died, the funeral was small. My father handled most of the arrangements. Patricia Nolan attended the service but left before the reception. A month later, my parents invited Ryan and me to their house to discuss the estate. My father explained that the commercial building had been sold before Grandma's death, and that the proceeds had been placed into a family trust. He said he and my mother would manage it. "Your grandmother wanted us secure," he told us. "Whatever remains will pass down later." Ryan asked whether the trust could help him purchase equipment for his business. My mother answered before my father could. "We'll see what makes sense." I asked whether I needed to meet with the lawyer. My father shook his head. "It's routine. Patricia has everything handled." That was the version of the story I accepted for more than a decade. Each spring, a tax form arrived from the bank. It listed a modest amount of trust income under my Social Security number. My father told me the accountant had structured things that way for tax efficiency. The amount was usually between $2,000 and $4,000, and the trust paid the related taxes through distributions. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I placed the forms with my tax documents and assumed my parents understood the arrangement better than I did. The first detail that felt wrong appeared 7 years before the bank meeting, shortly after my 45th birthday. A quarterly statement arrived at my condo addressed to Ellen Mercer, trustee. I called my mother. "Why does the bank think I'm the trustee?" She laughed softly. "Probably a clerical error. Your grandmother used one of those standard forms. Your father will take care of it." A week later, my father asked me to bring the statement to him. I did. After that, statements stopped arriving at my condo. I later learned that the mailing address on the account had been changed to my parents' house 12 days after my birthday. At the time, I felt relieved. One less piece of paperwork to understand. Ryan's business began having serious problems 3 years later. A large condominium renovation was delayed by permit issues and material shortages. Ryan had priced the project too aggressively and spent the deposit on labor for another job. When the condominium owners withheld the next payment, he had no cash to cover payroll. He called me late on a Thursday. "I need a bridge," he said. 30 days at most. He asked for $18,000. I told him I did not have that much available. "You have investments." "I have retirement accounts. I'm not withdrawing from them." He became quiet. Then he said, "You know, Mom and Dad are planning to divide everything eventually. I'm only asking for an advance." I asked what he meant. He backed away immediately. "Nothing. Forget it." The next morning, my mother called and accused me of humiliating him. "He has employees who depend on him," she said. "You could show a little compassion. I don't have $18,000 sitting around. You have more security than he does." That phrase, "more security," became the justification for almost everything that followed. My parents gave Ryan the money themselves. At least that was what they told me. His business survived the immediate crisis. He landed 2 new projects and seemed to recover. At Christmas, he gave my father a new watch and my mother a weekend at a resort. He gave me a candle. It was not the difference in gifts that bothered me. It was the expression on my mother's face when she opened the resort envelope. She looked relieved, almost reimbursed. Over the next 2 years, small signs accumulated. My father began asking strange questions about my finances. How much equity did I have in my condo? Had I increased my retirement contributions? Was I still carrying disability insurance through work? My mother asked whether I planned to leave anything to Ryan's children. Ryan knew the approximate value of my retirement account, even though I had never told him. At a family cookout, his wife mentioned that the trust money would eventually allow Ryan to expand into commercial work. I asked which trust she meant. She looked at Ryan before answering. Your parents' trust. Ryan interrupted and changed the subject. I should have confronted them then. Instead, I convinced myself that my parents had discussed their own estate with him and not with me. That hurt, but it did not feel illegal. The practical threat became clear when I received a certified letter from Hillside Community Bank. The letter stated that the bank required updated identity documents and a trustee certification before processing the requested change in investment authority. I called the number at the bottom. A customer service employee asked for my account number. I said I did not have one. She verified my identity and then paused. Ms. Mercer, you are listed as the current trustee. I told her there had been a mistake for years and that my parents managed the account. She transferred me to Thomas Green. Thomas asked whether I had recently authorized my parents to move the trust's assets into a self-directed brokerage account. No. Did you sign a trustee resignation? No. Did you approve a new investment advisor? No. He became careful with his words. I think we should meet in person. Before that meeting could happen, my mother called. Her voice was warm, almost cheerful. Your father and I need one little signature from you. She brought a folder to my condo that evening. Inside was a 3-page document titled Consent and Ratification of Trustee Actions. She explained that the bank needed it because of that old clerical error. What actions am I ratifying? Routine management. I read the first page twice. It referred to previous distributions, investment decisions, reimbursements, and changes in account administration. There was no list of amounts. I told her I wanted Thomas to explain it first. Her expression changed. Since when do you involve strangers in family finances? The stranger works for the bank holding the money. The money your grandmother left for all of us. That sentence stayed with me. All of us. Not my parents, not Ryan. All of us. I asked to keep the document. She pulled it back into the folder. If you're going to turn this into a problem, I'll have the attorney call you. No attorney called. 2 days later, my father came to my office during lunch. He rarely visited me at work. He stood near the payroll department's glass doors, holding a paper cup of coffee I had not asked for. He said Ryan's business was in danger. A former project manager had underestimated costs on several jobs. Suppliers were demanding payment. The Internal Revenue Service had placed a lien against the company for unpaid payroll taxes. If Ryan could not secure financing, he might close and lay off 9 people. Your mother and I want to help him, my father said. With your money, with family money. I asked whether he meant the trust. He looked toward the reception desk. The trust will come to you and Ryan eventually. That is not what the bank told me. The bank doesn't understand what your grandmother intended. I reminded him that a bank usually followed documents, not intentions. He sighed. Ellen, you're good at your job, but you can make paperwork bigger than it is. Ryan is facing a real emergency. There it was again. His emergency was real. My ownership was paperwork. I agreed to attend a family meeting that Sunday. That was my second mistake. I still believed the problem could be solved through a calm conversation. My parents had already decided what would happen. At their dining room table, Ryan presented a written plan. The trust would transfer $238,000 to Mercer Home Renewal. In exchange, the company would issue a promissory note at 4% interest, with payments beginning after 18 months. The note was unsecured. Ryan's company had tax debt, overdue suppliers, and trucks pledged as collateral. If the company failed, the note would likely be worthless. I asked whether an independent accountant had reviewed the plan. Ryan leaned back. You work in payroll. Don't pretend you understand construction finance. I understand what unsecured means. My mother placed her hand over the document. This is not a negotiation. We are informing you because the bank created confusion. I looked at my father. Do you believe you have the right to give him this money? He hesitated. Then he said morally, yes. That answer frightened me more than a lie would have. I left without signing anything. The family group chat went silent the next morning. My mother stopped sending photographs. Ryan removed me from a shared album containing pictures of my niece and nephew. 3 days later, Thomas called. My parents and Ryan had appeared at the bank with the transfer request. Because of the amount and the pending identity review, the bank had placed the request on hold. Thomas asked me to come in that afternoon. When I arrived, my family was already there. That was the meeting where my mother announced that they had made the responsible choice. It was also where Thomas revealed that the trust agreement made me sole trustee at 45. He explained the situation in plain language. My grandmother had created the trust with proceeds from the commercial property. She had divided part of her estate into 2 separate shares. Ryan had received his share outright after her death because he was already married and building a business. He had received $96,000. My share, $287,000 at the time, had been placed in a protected trust. The trust agreement said my parents could act as administrative co-trustees until I turned 45. They could pay taxes, manage investments, and make distributions for my benefit. On my 45th birthday, their authority ended automatically. I became sole trustee and sole beneficiary. My grandmother had not delayed my access because she doubted me. She had protected my share because she doubted the pressure my family might place on me. Thomas showed me a letter Patricia Nolan had sent to the bank when the trust was established. It stated that my grandmother wanted my inheritance preserved independently because I had a long-standing tendency to subordinate my own financial interests to family requests. Reading that sentence felt like hearing my grandmother speak from the other side of the table. She had understood my weakness before I did. My father argued that the trust had always been intended as a family resource. Thomas pointed to the distribution section. Funds could be used only for my health, education, support, housing, retirement, or other direct benefit. There was no authority to invest in Ryan's company. My mother said, "We managed that account for years." "You had limited authority for a defined period," Thomas replied. "That period ended." Ryan's face reddened. "So she gets everything?" Thomas looked at him. "You received your distribution 12 years ago." Ryan denied that he had received $96,000. Thomas produced the closing records. The money had been wired into a business account Ryan used before forming Mercer Home Renewal. The bank statement listed the transaction and the account's tax identification number. Ryan stared at the page for several seconds. Then he said, "That money went into the company. It wasn't personal." My mother immediately supported him. "He used it to build something." I asked what they thought I would have used mine for. No one answered. Thomas said the bank was freezing all outgoing transactions until its legal department completed a review. He also said the account history showed several distributions made after my parents' authority had ended. My mother stood. "This is ridiculous." Thomas remained seated. "We need to determine whether those transfers were authorized. They were reimbursements. For what? Expenses. What expenses?" She looked at my father. That was when I understood that the attempted $238,000 transfer was not the beginning. It was only the first transfer too large for the bank to ignore. Thomas gave me a copy of the trust agreement and recommended that I speak with an attorney who represented me alone. My parents left without saying goodbye. Ryan paused at the door. "You're going to destroy my company over money you didn't earn." I looked down at the trust agreement. "Grandma earned it. She decided where it should go." He shook his head. "You don't need it." That was his entire moral argument. Need had become ownership. A coworker named Marisol helped me find an attorney. She had gone through a dispute over her father's estate and warned me not to hire someone recommended by relatives. Rebecca Lynn practiced trust and probate litigation. Her office was above a dental clinic, and the waiting room coffee tasted burned. Nothing about her felt dramatic. She read the trust agreement, the bank letter, and the transfer request without interrupting. Then she asked me a question I did not want to answer. "Did you ever sign anything approving your parents' actions?" I told her about annual forms my father had mailed to me. I had signed at least 3 without reading them carefully. Rebecca did not reassure me. "Those documents may matter. We need copies." I asked whether my parents could take the money. "The pending transfer is frozen. That part is safe for now. But ownership and recovery of past distributions are separate questions. The bank may have administrative responsibility. Your parents may claim you approved their conduct. Your brother may claim he received funds in good faith. Did he? We don't know yet." She charged $375 an hour and required a $700 retainer. Justice, I learned, did not begin with a triumphant hearing. It began with a credit card payment and a headache. Rebecca sent formal preservation letters to the bank, my parents, Ryan, and his company. The letters instructed them not to delete emails, texts, accounting files, or records connected to the trust. She told me not to argue in the family group chat, post accusations online, or contact Ryan's employees. Your family wants this treated as an emotional disagreement, she said. We are going to treat it as a series of questions records can answer. The bank produced 8 years of statements. At first, the numbers looked devastating. There were 27 distributions after my 45th birthday, totaling $91,460. Most had vague descriptions such as property maintenance, tax reimbursement, administrative expense, and beneficiary support. The money went first into my parents' joint checking account. From there, several similar amounts moved to Ryan or his company. I felt physically sick. Rebecca refused to let me jump to conclusions. Money moving through the same account does not automatically prove every payment was stolen, she said. We trace it. The first apparent theft turned out to be legitimate. A $14,800 distribution had paid the final property tax and environmental inspection costs related to my grandmother's building. The expense had been incurred before the sale closed, and the trust was responsible. Another $9,200 had covered accounting fees, insurance, and taxes that benefited the trust. I had accused my father in my own mind before seeing the records. That correction mattered. It reminded me that evidence had to work in both directions. But the remaining transfers were harder to explain. There was a $12,000 distribution labeled Beneficiary Housing Support made during a year when I had received no money and paid my own mortgage. 9 days later, my parents transferred $11,500 to Ryan. There was an $8,400 medical distribution during a period when I had no unusual medical expenses. My mother wrote Ryan a check for $8,000 the following week. A $16,000 education distribution was followed by a payment to a technical college where Ryan's oldest employee had completed certification courses. Ryan claimed the training improved the value of the company and would therefore help the family. Rebecca read that explanation twice. The trust does not own the company, she said. There is no benefit to you. The most painful record was not the largest. It was a $6,300 distribution made on my 50th birthday. That morning, my mother had called to say she was too tired to meet for lunch. She mailed me a card with a $20 gift certificate inside. The bank record showed that the money left the trust at 10:42 a.m. My father transferred $6,000 to Ryan that afternoon. Ryan used it to make a past-due truck payment. When Rebecca obtained copies of the annual forms I had signed, the case became more difficult. The forms were titled Beneficiary Acknowledgement and Approval of Accountings. My father had sent them with sticky notes, marking the signature lines. By signing, I had acknowledged receiving annual summaries and approved certain trustee actions through the end of 2021. I had not received the summaries, but my signature was real. Rebecca explained that my parents would argue I had ratified the transfers. Can they win? They can create uncertainty. A judge may ask why you approved accountings you did not read. I did not have a good answer. I had signed because my father said the forms were for taxes. I had assumed my parents would never use my trust against me. Rebecca looked at me across her desk. Trusting them explains what you did. It does not erase what you signed. That was the moment I stopped thinking of myself only as someone who had been deceived. I had also abandoned my own responsibility. The signed forms covered 3 disputed transfers totaling $19,500. The later transfers were not included, but the documents gave my parents a defense and gave Ryan's attorney room to argue that the family had always treated the trust as flexible. Ryan hired an attorney named Douglas Vance, who sent us a letter accusing me of reversing years of family consent because I had become resentful of Ryan's success. The letter described my parents as elderly people being harassed by an unmarried daughter attempting to isolate them from their grandchildren. It was a polished version of the family story. Ryan was the provider, my parents were the vulnerable elders, I was the financially secure sister, creating conflict over money I did not need. The letter demanded that I approve the $238,000 loan in exchange for Ryan acknowledging the trust's remaining balance and releasing future claims. Rebecca called it a settlement proposal designed to divide the family before we had full records. My mother called it my final chance to act like a sister. I refused. The bank's internal review uncovered another problem. When I turned 45, the bank's trust department had received an automated notice that my parents' authority had ended. An employee updated the beneficiary designation, but failed to remove my parents from the authorized signer profile. That administrative mistake allowed them to continue requesting distributions. However, the bank had sent a trustee transition letter to my condo. I never received it because my father had changed the mailing address 12 days earlier. The bank's electronic log showed the address change had been requested through a paper form bearing my father's signature. The form included a box stating that the current trustee had approved the change. My name was typed beneath it. There was no signature from me. That document did not prove every transfer was intentional theft. It did prove that my father had represented that I approved an address change I knew nothing about. When Rebecca questioned him in a formal deposition, he said the bank employee had told him how to complete the form. The bank employee, now retired, remembered something different. She had kept notes because my father called 3 times in 1 week. Her notes stated, "Keller advised daughter does not want statements and has delegated mail handling. Requested written authorization. No written authorization from me existed." The bank also recovered an email from my mother to Thomas's predecessor. "Ellen becomes anxious over legal and investment paperwork," she had written. "Her father and I have always handled these matters to prevent unnecessary stress." That sentence used a piece of truth. I did become anxious around family conflict. I had once taken medication for panic attacks after my engagement ended. My mother knew that. She turned an old vulnerability into evidence of incapacity without ever using the word incapable. Ryan's attorney later argued that my parents continued managing the trust because I wanted them to. The email helped explain why bank employees had believed them. It also showed how carefully my mother had shaped the story. She did not say I was incompetent. She said they were protecting me. The first court hearing was not a trial. Rebecca filed a petition in county probate court asking for a declaration that I was the sole trustee, an accounting of all post-transition transactions, and an order preventing my parents from representing themselves as trustees. Ryan's attorney opposed the petition because his company had an interest in the proposed loan. The judge, Margaret Cole, was reserved and practical. She did not accuse anyone of stealing. She asked whether the trust agreement was authentic, whether any later amendment existed, and whether I had ever resigned. No amendment or resignation existed. Judge Cole issued a temporary order confirming that I alone had authority over the account and prohibiting any transfer to Ryan. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it triggered the setback that almost broke me. Ryan's primary lender called his line of credit. Without the trust money, he could not meet the demand. He laid off 4 employees and suspended 2 projects. One of those employees was my cousin's husband. Within a week, relatives I had not heard from in years began contacting me. My aunt said I was punishing working families. My cousin sent photographs of her children and asked whether preserving my retirement was worth taking food from their table. My mother forwarded me a message from Ryan's foreman, who said the crew had always considered the Mercers family. The consequences were real. Ryan had made reckless decisions, but his employees had not. For several nights I barely slept. I considered approving a smaller loan with strict security. Rebecca told me I could do that if I chose, but she asked one question first. What asset would secure it? Ryan's trucks were already pledged. His receivables were disputed. His company leased its building. His home had a large mortgage and a tax lien. There was nothing meaningful to secure the loan. Giving him less money would not make the decision safer. Would only reduce the amount lost when the business failed. Then another fact emerged. Ryan's financial statements showed that he had paid himself $132,000 the previous year while failing to deposit all employee payroll taxes. He had also used company funds for a family vacation, private school tuition, and the lease on his wife's SUV. When asked why, he said those expenses were part of maintaining the image necessary to attract clients. He was not a man who had suffered one unlucky project. He had built a business that depended on the next payment arriving before the last obligation became visible. My parents had seen the warning signs. They had loaned him $74,000 of their own money over 6 years. He had repaid less than $9,000. The trust transfer was not a rescue plan. It was the next place they intended to move the loss. The human truth came out during court-ordered mediation. We sat in separate rooms while a mediator moved between us. Late in the afternoon, my parents agreed to meet with me directly. Ryan remained with his attorney. My mother looked smaller than she had at the bank. My father carried a folder filled with copies of bills, as though the right stack of paper could prove they had been good parents. I asked them one question. Why was Ryan allowed to spend his inheritance, borrow your savings, and then take mine? My father said Ryan had made mistakes but had a family to support. So do millions of people. They do not get their sister's trust. My mother pressed her lips together. You were always going to be okay. I asked how she knew. You have a good job, you save. You don't take risks. That did not happen by accident. I gave things up to become stable. We know that. Then why did my stability count less than his choices? She looked toward the window. Finally, she said, because when Ryan falls, everyone feels it. The answer was so honest that it hurt more than denial. Ryan's crises filled rooms. They created phone calls, emergencies, frightened employees, crying children, and urgent decisions. My losses were quiet. I absorbed them before anyone else had to feel uncomfortable. My father added, "We believed you would be angry, but eventually you would understand." I asked, "When did being dependable become permission to take from me?" He did not answer. My mother said we were trying to keep the family together. No, we were trying to keep Ryan from experiencing the consequences of his own decisions. She began to cry, but I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired. The mediator proposed a settlement. The bank agreed that its failure to remove my parents as authorized signers contributed to the unauthorized distributions. Without admitting intentional wrongdoing, it offered to restore $3,600 to the trust and pay part of my legal fees. My parents agreed to repay $22,000 over 4 years from the sale of a small parcel of land they owned. Ryan agreed to repay $17,500 through a secured claim against future business proceeds and to withdraw any claim that he had an interest in the trust. The remaining disputed amount involved transactions covered by the forms I had signed and legitimate administrative expenses. Recovering more would require a trial with uncertain results and significant cost. Rebecca told me the truth. We can keep fighting. You may recover another $20,000. You may also spend that much proving it. Justice had limits. I accepted the financial terms, but refused one condition my mother requested. She wanted the settlement to state that the dispute resulted from a mutual misunderstanding. It had not. I agreed to language saying no party admitted fraud or criminal conduct. I would not call it mutual. My parents had misunderstood nothing about the address change, my lack of approval, or where the money was going. They had believed their reasons were more important than my rights. When Ryan learned that the trust would not save his company, he changed his position again. He claimed my grandmother had favored me unfairly by placing my share in a protected account while giving him cash. According to him, the protection had allowed my inheritance to grow, while his had been consumed by business expenses. Rebecca asked him who decided to put his distribution into the business. He said he did. She asked whether anyone forced him to do so. He said no. She asked whether I had received any portion of his $96,000. He stopped answering directly. His attorney requested a break. Ryan's company eventually filed for reorganization. He sold 2 trucks, reduced his staff to 5, and negotiated a payment plan for the payroll taxes. The business did not disappear. It became smaller. That consequence was less dramatic than prison and more appropriate. For the first time in his life, Ryan had to operate within the limits of the money he actually possessed. The probate court entered a final order, confirming me as sole trustee and beneficiary. The order also stated that my parents had no current authority to direct distributions or speak for the trust. There was no speech from the judge. Judge Cole reviewed the agreement, asked whether each party understood it, and signed. The official record was only 6 pages long. Those 6 pages changed the story my family had told about me. I was not confused. I was not taking money from Ryan. I was not withholding a family asset. The trust had been mine to manage for 7 years, and my parents had hidden that fact because they believed I would be easier to sacrifice than my brother. The bank restored the agreed amount within 30 days. My parents sold the land the following spring and made their first repayment. Ryan missed his second scheduled payment. Rebecca filed the required notice, and his attorney arranged a new automatic transfer before further action became necessary. No one was arrested. No one confessed publicly. My relatives did not gather around me and apologize. Some continued believing that I had chosen money over family. Others stopped discussing the subject because acknowledging the truth would have required them to examine how often they had benefited from my silence. My cousin's husband found another job. Months later, he sent me a short email. "I was angry because I was scared," he wrote. "Ryan told us the money had already been approved and you stopped it at the last minute. I understand now that wasn't true." It was not a full apology, but it was honest. I accepted it. My father wrote me a longer letter. He said he regretted changing the address and signing documents after his authority ended. He admitted that he had told himself the trust would eventually pass to Ryan's children anyway, so using it early did not feel like stealing. Then, near the end, he asked me to consider creating education accounts for my niece and nephew. Even his apology contained another request. I did not respond for 6 weeks. When I finally did, I thanked him for acknowledging what he had done. I told him that decisions about my niece and nephew would be mine and would not be discussed while Ryan still owed the trust money. My mother never wrote a formal apology. She called twice during the first year and spoke as though we could return to normal if neither of us mentioned the case. The second time, she invited me to Thanksgiving. Ryan will be there, she said. We expect everyone to be civil. I asked whether he had apologized. He has lost almost everything. Isn't that enough? No, what more do you want? Accountability that isn't forced by a court order. She said I was holding a grudge. I told her I was holding a boundary. I spent that Thanksgiving with Marisol and her family. I brought my grandmother's apple cake, made from a recipe written on an index card in her narrow handwriting. For the first hour, I felt like a guest in someone else's life. Then Marisol's grandson asked me to help him build a cardboard train station, and her husband argued cheerfully about whether the turkey needed another 10 minutes. No one asked me to fix a crisis. No one measured my value by how much discomfort I could absorb. It was one of the quietest holidays I had experienced. It was also one of the safest. I hired an independent trust administrator to handle statements, tax documents, and required reporting. The service cost money, but every distribution now required clear documentation. I changed the mailing address, security questions, and account access credentials. I updated my will. I did create education accounts for Ryan's children eventually, but I funded them with my own monthly contributions. Ryan could not withdraw from them. My parents could not direct them. The children would receive the money only for qualified education expenses. I did not tell the family for almost a year. Privacy, I finally understood, was not the same as secrecy. Privacy meant I could make a generous decision without surrendering control of it. The original trust balance had grown during the years my parents managed it, even after the unauthorized distributions. Once the reimbursements and settlement payments were complete, it was worth a little over $321,000. That amount did not make me rich. It allowed me to increase my retirement security, pay my legal fees, replace an aging furnace in my condo, and stop worrying that one illness could erase everything I had built. More important, it gave me back the right to define what security meant in my own life. Ryan and I have spoken only twice since the settlement. The first conversation occurred at the hospital after my father suffered a mild stroke. Ryan stood near the vending machines and said he hoped we could put the dispute behind us for Dad's sake. I told him I would be respectful in the hospital. That's not what I mean, I know. He looked exhausted. His company shirt was faded, and there was gray in his beard I had not noticed before. I really did think I could save the business, he said. I believe you. He seemed surprised. Then why couldn't you help me? Because believing in your plan did not give you the right to use my money. He stared at the floor. Mom and Dad said you'd understand. I understand exactly what happened. That was the last thing I said to him that day. Understanding did not require agreement. Compassion did not require access. Love did not require financing someone else's refusal to change. My father recovered well enough to return home. I helped with some medical appointments, but I no longer manage my parents' bills or solve every practical problem. They hired a part-time bookkeeper after missing 2 insurance payments. My mother complained about the expense. I reminded her that independent help protected everyone. She didn't appreciate the irony. A year after the bank meeting, Thomas called to tell me he was retiring. Before we ended the conversation, he apologized for the bank's role. Our procedures failed you, he said. I appreciated that he did not call it a misunderstanding. The bank's mistake had made the betrayal easier, but the bank had not created my family's beliefs. The forms, signatures, and transfers were only the visible part. The real problem had started years earlier, each time my family decided that Ryan's pain was urgent and mine was manageable. My grandmother had seen it. She had not trusted me less than my brother. She had trusted my willingness to help him too much. Several months after the settlement, I cleaned the storage closet in my condo. Behind a box of holiday decorations, I found a plastic bin with a cracked lid. Inside were old tax returns, damp photographs, and the sealed envelope my grandmother had given me. The paper was stained along one edge, but the contents were readable. There was a copy of the trust summary and a handwritten letter. My grandmother had written that she was proud of the life I had built. She said she worried I mistook being useful for being loved. One sentence stopped me. You are allowed to remain kind without making yourself available for consumption. I sat on the floor for a long time holding that letter. The bank had revealed who controlled the trust. My grandmother's words revealed why she had created it. She had not been planning revenge against my parents or Ryan. She had been building a boundary she feared I would not build for myself. I keep the original letter in a fire-resistant box now. The trust agreement is stored with it, along with the court order and a list of contact information for the independent administrator. Every few months, a statement arrives at my condo with my name printed correctly above the word trustee. I open it myself. On Sunday mornings, I drink coffee at the small table beside my kitchen window. Sometimes my phone lights up with a family message. Sometimes I answer. Sometimes I let it remain face down until I am ready. That choice still feels new. The inheritance mattered, but not only because of the money. It forced my family's private rules into the open. Ryan's emergencies no longer automatically outranked my future. My parents' fear no longer counted as my consent. My silence no longer meant approval. The truth did not destroy our family. The choices made before the truth did that. The truth only revealed what had already been spent. Would you have accepted the settlement and kept your distance, or required a full apology before allowing your family back into your life? Share your view in the comments, like the video, and subscribe for more reality-inspired family stories about betrayal, boundaries, and earned justice. This story was created for dramatic storytelling, entertainment, and reflection.